Okay, how many of you are happy that we are done with the book of Colossians? It is over. We've made it through 4 months of that 4-chapter book. I'm happy to announce that we are now moving into a new book of the Bible. We're going to the Old Testament, and we are going to study the book of Joel together. Show of hands, how many of you are super familiar with this book? You know a lot about it. You read it all the time. You memorized its verses. Yeah, not a lot of us. It's in the Old Testament. It's a minor prophet book. These books tend to get a little bit passed over by us as we favor more of the stories of the Old Testament, or maybe the Psalms or the Proverbs. But here, we're going to go through this 3-chapter book of prophecy, which is an oracle given to Joel by God to relay a message to the people living in Judah. I don't know if you know this or not, but after the death of King Solomon, first you had King David, first you had Saul, then David, and then Solomon. After Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel split into 2 kingdoms. And you had a northern kingdom and you had a southern kingdom. And for the next, however long, that's how Israel operated. A king in the north and a king in the south. And you had Samaria as the capital of the northern kingdom, and Jerusalem was the capital of the southern kingdom. So when you read a prophetic book in the Old Testament, sometimes the book is being geared towards the northern kingdom, and sometimes it's towards the southern. And this book, the book of Joel, is him prophesying to the people of Judah in the south. Again, the Old Testament can be difficult to read and understand. Books of prophecy especially can be confusing, as we have announcements of judgment that happen here, and that can be uncomfortable. But I think if we take some time as a church to look at a book of prophecy together, it's going to empower us to read the Bible better and be more enriched with its contents, because all 66 books of the Bible are there for us, for God to speak to us, and we want God to transform us through his entire 66 books, right? Mm-hmm. We want to look at this book and we want to say, okay, what Joel announced to Judah, what is God wanting to announce to us today? Whatever was happening in Judah at that time, are there similarities to what's happening in our culture, our community, and how are these words relevant to us? If God was trying to get the attention of the people of Judah, how might God be trying to get our attention? If God wanted Judah to understand some things, what might God want to help us understand? As we explore this book over the summer, we're going to encounter a few themes that are very common in prophetic literature, and we find it all through the Bible. And the 5 themes that we're going to see in this book are the judgment of God, the mercy of God, repentance, the day of the Lord, and this idea of already but not yet, the idea that something is happening right now in the present, but it's also speaking towards future events that might be happening as well. So these 5 themes, if we can learn about them and understand them through our study of the book of Joel, it's going to equip us and empower us to do a really good reading of a lot of other prophetic books that we find in the Old Testament, even the book of Revelation. The book of Joel was written to a community in crisis. The book of Joel was written to a community in crisis, and this is probably the number one reason why I chose for our church to study this book at this time. Because the words that Joel is given are given to him while the people were in the midst, right in the middle of a catastrophe. And we are going to find out what that crisis was shortly. I want us to think about this idea of crisis and catastrophe, because when I think about what's happening in our world today and what you and I are enduring, this is a common theme, whether it's in our personal lives, whether it's what's happening in our city, whether it's what's happening in our nation, and whatever is happening globally. I'm sure all of us could sit here and right now begin to think of all of the struggles, all of the difficulties, everything that is going on in our lives that feels like we are in crisis mode. And then to top everything off, we have access to the internet, we have access to social media, and it feels like we are living with and under the burden of every single catastrophe and crisis that is happening. We know everybody's business, and it's weighing us down, it's draining us, it's sucking the life from us, because it's not just our own struggles, it's not just our own circumstances. We're wrestling with the circumstances of the entire world. Are you with me? So what can Joel offer us? What can Joel give us as Joel gives these words to a community in crisis, because God is asking them to live a certain way, act a certain way, and respond a certain way? John Barton writes this: "The book of Joel asserts the goodness and mercy of Yahweh towards the people in all times of crisis, small or great, and the eventual vindication of Yahweh's character in the events of the end time. The book as it stands is not just focused on a particular time of crisis, but is meant to bring comfort and consolation by emphasizing that God is in control of all things and will carry out God's good purposes in God's own good time." The book of Joel is ultimately a book of hope for you and for me. It says that even though things aren't going well in the moment, and even though things are not going to go well for the foreseeable future even, you and I can trust that God is ultimately going to set things right and restore all things, and he is in process of doing that. And I call this a frustrating hope, because how many of you want things to be fixed right now? How many of you want things to be dealt with in the moment? How many of you want the crisis to be over, for the catastrophe to have been passed? That is where we're all at. But what Joel is teaching us is that, yes, God is doing these things, but it doesn't mean that they are happening in the immediate. And Joel says, here is how we should act. Here is how we should live, and here is how we should respond while we are in crisis, knowing that restoration, renewal, and relief might not be coming as quickly as we want it to. I don't know if you've experienced this or not, but I have, that there is a silver lining to ongoing crisis in our lives. And it's this: that God becomes most present and performs radical transformation and growth in us while we are in crisis during these prolonged seasons. And I know none of us want to endure what John Chrysostom penned as the dark night of the soul. We don't want to live in that state, but we can't run away from the fact that God meets us in these desolate places in our lives, and it's usually more powerfully and most profoundly if we will let him in. If we will let him in. So the question is when crisis hits, will we become more desperate for him? Will we become more dependent upon him? Will we become more open and more aware of him? Or will we choose to become angry with him, run from him, and resent him? All of us have recently gone through a prolonged state of crisis through the COVID pandemic. Years of upheaval, turmoil, and I can tell you, as a pastor, it was one of the most difficult seasons for me in terms of knowing how to pastor when we could not gather together. People were getting sick. People were dying. People were leaving the church, leaving Chicago. It was a difficult season, feeling fully alone without the community, trying to keep the community together. But I can tell you, as I reflect back on what God was doing in me as a leader and as a pastor, he used that season to train me, to refine me, and to grow me in a way that I would not have grown outside of that. Do you understand? So there's a blessing in the fact that we come to these seasons in our lives because God wants to meet us there, and there's transformative work that he is going to do in us that he can only accomplish in that environment and that fire that we are in. David Baker writes this: this kind of hope, he's talking about the hope found in the book of Joel, in the face of catastrophe is not one that sits well with many Christians today. A health and wealth gospel understands blessings as flowing inevitably from a right relationship with God, while suffering indicates a breach in one's relationship with Him. Joel gives a different take on this. He does not imply that blessing means elimination of obstacles and pain. Hear me, church. He is not implying that blessing means elimination of obstacles and pain, but rather that God's presence, bringing one through these events, which are a natural concomitant, which is a natural accompaniment to all human existence, that is where the blessing really resides. So here we are, many of us experiencing multiple catastrophes and multiple crises ongoing in our lives. We're weighted down by what is happening in our city. We're burdened by what is happening in our country, with what we know happening globally with wars and famine, and we just don't know how much more we can handle or take. We don't know how much longer we can exist in the midst of these current circumstances as we are living through them and aware of them, and we have in many ways become paralyzed in our lives, not truly living the way God is asking us or wanting or intended us to live and have life. So this is where Joel can become the lifeline for us. Because if you and I are willing to open ourselves up to this message and to his words, he is going to help us understand God better. He's going to help us live with hope. He's going to help us to trust that God will sustain and ultimately bring us through. And he is going to help us live differently than we are currently living right now in the midst of it. Because right now, in the midst of the crisis, the catastrophe, in the wake of COVID and everything that we've been going through, we are living incomplete, sort of hollow lives, I would say. Some of us have turned to coping mechanisms. So we are living with addictions, habits, and behaviors as we just try to cope through what we have experienced and what we are experiencing. Drugs, alcohol, pornography, sex, like these different things that we talk about. Some of us are living life just trying to distract ourselves on an ongoing basis. We're turning to technology. We're looking at streaming platforms. We're using our phones, and we're just scrolling, and we are deadening ourselves because we don't want to feel and really pay attention to what we're going through because we are trying to escape our lives, escape our circumstances, escape what's going on in the world today through this type of distraction. Some of us are just believing that we are creatures of strength and willpower, and we are just digging our heels in. We are saying, I'm going to do all of this in my strength. I've got it. I'm in crisis. I'm in catastrophe. I hear about, but I'm just going to keep plowing through, and I'm just going to hold on, and it's me, me, me. I've got this. Some of us are growing into greater levels of outrage, anger, and hostility as we are just tapping into those emotions as sort of like our natural disposition and way of living. Some of us have turned to thrills, excitement, and experiences, but how many trips can we take? How many experiences with friends can we have? How much shopping can we do? How much of all of this stuff can happen, can take place in our lives, but yet we still feel the way we feel because these things don't lead to ultimate satisfaction for us. At some point, are we going to develop the humility to be able to admit to ourselves that the way we are living, the way we are operating in this world of ongoing crisis and catastrophe, we are not doing it well? Because if we can't admit that, then we can't be helped. How many of us have reached a level of exhaustion where they're ready to say, okay, what I am doing is not renewing me. What I am doing is not giving me new life. What I am doing is not really giving me joy and contentment and peace. I'm just sort of struggling here. I'm here, but I'm not really living. How many of us are ready to admit our own disappointments and to recognize that what we're doing is not healthy, not helpful, and it's not giving us the return on investment that we were hoping for it to give us? My friend, pain, suffering, and struggle are not going anywhere. In fact, the Bible talks about them increasing as we move towards the ends of days. So if pain, suffering, struggle, and crisis are with us for the foreseeable future, then we have to change. Because the world isn't going to change until God ultimately comes back and sets everything right. We have to learn to engage with adversity in a different way. Because if we can do it God's way, according to what we find here in the book of Joel, we will experience a taste of heaven in the midst of a broken world. Now, let me say that again. Joel is going to help you and I experience and live in a taste of heaven in a broken world. I like how Eugene Peterson says this, because he's not just saying this about us as individuals, but it's about us as a church community. He says, to be a colony of heaven in a country of death. Joel is not going to offer you and I an easy way forward, but he offers us a hopeful one. He's going to center us in the blessing of the presence of God. How many of you know that heaven is basically where God dwells? It is his presence. That is what makes heaven so special, so amazing, so beautiful. God's presence is there. We, according to Joel, can navigate and walk through life experiencing the presence of God, being blessed with God's presence as we navigate our current circumstances. We will receive strength, sustenance, and power. Joel says we can have a deep faith and a trust in God, believing that he is in control. He is renewing all things. He's restoring all things. And yes, right now, in this moment, in our state of exhaustion, in our state of depletion, in our state of anxiety, whatever it is that we are experiencing, we can be renewed and restored right now today. So are you ready to start going through the book of Joel together? Excited for this? Let's look at verse 1 together. The word of the Lord that came to Joel, son of Pethuel. In many ways, Joel is a mysterious book to us. I have to admit, out of all the books in the Bible, there's just a lot of unknowns here that we don't know about this book. For instance, we have no idea when the book was written. We've got people dating it all the way back to the 9th century BC, all the way up to the 2nd century BC. That's a lot of years, right? So depending upon when the book was written, we would be able to understand better what the circumstances were, what the people of Judah were going through, so we could better have an idea of exactly what Joel is addressing in their day. And then on top of not really knowing the date of the book, and not knowing what events were actually happening in Judah at the time, we don't know anything about Joel other than the fact, and what we find here in verse 1, is that he was the son of Pethuel. We have no other documents. We have no other references to him, his father, his family. We have no other ancient manuscripts that have recorded information that tell us who Joel was or even why God chose him. For me, it seems like there's a very likely possibility that Joel was not a very well-known person in his day. He was probably an ordinary person coming from an ordinary family. He didn't have royal lineage. There's no other stuff written about this person. But yet God chose this ordinary person to be raised up as his prophet for Judah at this time. And this doesn't surprise me at all because God is in the business of taking ordinary people and using them in extraordinary ways for his purposes. That's how God likes to operate. He tends to use people that we as a society don't value. He likes to call and equip people who are living on the margins, unseen people who we tend to overlook and undervalue. God takes these people like Moses, David, Gideon, Rahab, Ruth, Esther, Mary, just to name a few, and he raises them up to be spiritual giants for his kingdom. The question is, are you and I able and willing to listen to these voices? Because you know what the number one voice that you and I like to listen to is ourselves. Our inner voice, our gut, our instincts, our evaluation, our plan. Okay, this is what I'm facing. Here's the crisis. Here's the catastrophes. Let's do it the way I know best. We also like to defer to voices of people who have achieved status, influence, power, and position. We take on the input of successful people, people who have written books, they've amassed a large following, people that society agrees, these are important people, these are wise people, these are educated people. And if that is all we are doing is listening to ourselves and listening to who we deem is important or other people tell us is important, we miss out on the voice of God and the word of God because we are then discarding everybody else. So think about now how you and I, how we are making our way through the crises and the catastrophes in our life. And we have to ask ourselves, how am I navigating these things? Where am I learning to navigate these things? The behaviors, my actions, who is teaching me? What voices are instructing me? How am I doing what I am doing? Why am I doing what I am doing? Maybe we're taking, as I said, we're just listening to our own wisdom, our own advice, things we've learned from our family of origin. We are reacting to our fears and to our anxiety. Maybe we are looking to as many self-help books as we can, or we're looking at TikTok reels, or we're getting advice from friends, or we're subconsciously just following natural patterns within us. We don't really know why we're doing what we're doing. We just do what we do, and we're just saying, this is just me. We have to be able to open ourselves up to Joel and other people like Joel, allowing God to come to us through voices and people we didn't quite expect, people that we don't naturally look up to, but maybe we even have a tendency to look down upon. Maybe there are people in society that we tend to reject, discard, or we have problems with them. Maybe it's uneducated people. Maybe it's young people. Maybe it's women. Maybe it's people who speak with broken English. Maybe we just have no respect for the unemployed, the poor, or the sick, and we are going to miss out on the work of God in our lives if we place these types of limits and registrations on who God is capable of speaking to us through, because for goodness sakes, God even used a donkey to speak to Balaam. I like what Eric Allen writes. He says, everyone is my teacher. Some I seek, some I subconsciously attract. Often I learn simply by observing others. Some may be completely unaware that I am learning from them, yet I bow in deep gratitude. My wife got me, she came home from her sister's house with an old hunting magazine that they had found in her house. Many of you know that I like to hunt. And they thought it would be of value to me to be able to read through like all of the articles and things like in this, it was hunting and fishing, this from years back. And all sorts of experts wrote articles on different topics around this type of sporting event and activity. And out of the entire magazine, there was a small section called Tips from the Readers. And there was these little bits of insight from just normal, everyday people that subscribed to the magazine that sent in their helpful tips for hunting. And it was life-changing what I read in that section. Because when I hunt, it's cold out normally, it's in winter, and I'm wearing a lot of bulky gear. and the rifle or the shotgun that I'm using, it's got this strap on it that you just sort of carry over your shoulder, and that strap just kept slipping off of my shoulder. It's a heavy gun, and like you're walking in snow, you're trying to climb, like you're doing a lot of and you're just losing and like I've tried doing it as like across my body, but it's too tight, like it doesn't work well. You're supposed to carry it right over your shoulder, and it just sort of hangs down to your side. And I can't tell you how annoying it is to just always have that slipping off the shoulder. Well, this guy wrote in there and said, if you have trouble with your gun slipping off of your shoulder, put some rubber bands on the strap, take a bunch of rubber bands and wrap them around, and it'll help it stick to the material. And I will tell you, it is the best advice that I got out of that magazine. And it didn't come from the experts. It didn't come from it came from an ordinary reader that just sent in the tip. Who you and I are open to listening from is going to be if we narrow it too much, we just lose the voice of God. In verse 2 and 3, Joel says, "Hear this, you elders. Listen, all who live in the land. Has anything like this ever happened in your days or in the days of your ancestors? Tell it to your children, and let your children tell it to their children, and their children to the next generation." Joel calls everyone to pay close attention to his words, but he calls out the elders. He says, "Elders, listen." And I don't think he's referring to elders in the sense of the people who hold the highest positions in society. He is talking to the people who have lived the longest in Judah, the old people in the land. And he asks the question and says, have you seen anything like this? Or do you know of anything like this that your ancestors faced in all of the years that you've lived? And guess what? Joel knows the answer. It's a rhetorical question. He knows that nobody has faced it. Nobody has experienced it. The crisis they are in is so extreme, it is so rare, it is so catastrophic that not even the oldest person in Judah can remember that they or their family members have ever experienced anything of this magnitude. And then he tells the elders that you have a responsibility. You have to pass the stories of this experience down to the next generations. Tell your children and their children what has happened. Tell them what this prophecy is instructing you to do. Tell them how you are to follow God's word here. Tell them how God sustains you and is going to bring you through, because your children need to know, the future generations need to know, because guess what? Calamity will strike again. Suffering is going to return. So you need to teach your children, teach your grandchildren what it means to follow God in the midst of this pain, in the midst of this death. Remind them of what God is looking for, of what God desires from his people when catastrophe strikes. Just how you and I tend to write off and disregard ordinary people on the margins, places where God surprisingly wants to come and speak to us through the Joels of this world. You know what we also do in society here, and especially in America? We tend to push older people to the side. We don't really value the elderly. It's like we want to put them on a shelf to forget about them. Like, what really do they have to offer anymore? It's like we want to banish them to the island of misfit toys. Rudolph, anyone? We seem to view the elderly as a burden to us, not a benefit. I think it was Virginia who said this phrase, and it's always stuck with me. She said, when we are younger, we feel invincible. When we get older, we feel invisible. Young people, it is vital and imperative that you form and foster and nurture relationships with Christian men and women who are 1, 2, or 3 generations beyond your years. Because they have seen some things. They have been through some things. And they have learned through experience what it means to depend on God and rely on God in hard times. They have actual testimonies to share with you about how God met them in the midst of their agony, in their pain, in their loss, and in their grief. They have lived and experienced rich blessings of God in the midst of tragedies that have come upon them. And their stories and their wisdom are going to be of help to you as you are floundering and as you feel like you are drowning right now. Older people, it is vital and imperative that you retain a sense of value and worth, even though society is trying to tell you a different story. Because you have so much to offer the younger generation. They need you. You, please, pursue people who are 1, 2, 3 generations behind you. Tell them your stories. Tell them the stories of your parents. Be a witness to the faithfulness of God, to the power of God. Help those who are struggling to move into what obedience and trusting in all circumstances looks like. Encourage the younger generation that they're going to make it because you've made it. Tell them that God has not forgotten them because God has never forgotten you. And now we move into verse 4. Where Joel reveals the crisis that Judah is facing. What the locust swarm has left, the great locusts have eaten. What the great locusts have left, the young locusts have eaten. What the young locusts have left, other locusts have eaten. There is a plague of locusts that has come through Judah. Now, with so much unknown about when the book of Joel was written, it's hard to determine exactly when this event happened. And because we don't know when the event happened, there's discussion over what are we talking about. Is Joel referring to an actual plague of locusts that came in and destroyed everything agriculturally? Or is he referring to a large army that's coming to invade, right? And that has come and invaded? Or is he just giving words to describe a famine? It might not have even been locusts, but some sort of natural drought or something came in and destroyed things agriculturally. I think there's a bit of a duality happening here because primarily I think I agree with a lot of scholars who say that Joel is talking about a real locust invasion. Something happened in Judah at some time where a large plague of locusts came through that was so large and so thick that it says in the book of Joel that the arrival darkened the sun. That's how many were flying in the air. And they came through and they destroyed every bit of agriculture that was in the region. And if you and I never grew up in a farming community or had to depend on our own growing of food to understand the devastation that's happening here, we're talking about their livelihood. We're talking about all of the food that would sustain them through the winter, it's for months. We're talking about if there is no food growing, we are going to starve and we are going to die. This was such a catastrophe. This was such a crisis to them. And as we've already heard, nothing like this had happened in their lifetime or in their ancestors' lifetime. So the question is what do we do? What are we supposed to do? Judah was so set on having a good growing season every year that they would regularly become unfaithful to the Lord. Because the Lord was saying, trust in me, trust in Yahweh only, I will give you everything that you need, which means I will help everything grow. You will have food. But they didn't fully trust in God. So what they would do is they would look around at the surrounding pagan cultures and look at the gods they were worshiping, and they would see, wow, they're having a great harvest. Look at the crops. Their God is helping them, so we should start worshiping their God too, or incorporating their worship practices into our worship practices, because we need food to grow here. This comparison game almost. And then they would start doing things that were dishonoring to God, rebelling against God, and then God would come in and say, this is what most of the Old Testament is referencing to, is Israel and Judah just continuously turning their back on God and embracing other gods and other practices. It was idolatry. In addition to an actual locust plague in the present, which then they were suffering through, there's also signs in this book that show a foreshadowing of an enemy invasion or multiple enemy invasions. It was not uncommon for locusts to be used as a metaphor to describe a large army. In Jeremiah 51, it says, "The Lord Almighty has sworn by himself, I will surely fill you with troops as with a swarm of locusts, and they will shout in triumph over you." There's an ancient Sumerian text that says, "Numerous like locusts they came striding, stretched out their arms in the desert for him like gazelle and wild ass snares. Nothing escaped their arms. Nobody did their arms leave." I like this quote because it gave me a chance to cuss from the pulpit. It's not outright stated in this book, but as we're going to see next week from the text, there is a high probability that the sending of the locusts was an act of God, that God sent them in judgment on the people, a consequence for their ongoing rejection of him, their rebellion of him, and improper conduct. God is trying to get their attention because he wants the people to return to him. The metaphor of this invading army in the future seems to be a warning to Judah, where God is saying, you are in the midst of this crisis because I've sent the locusts, but if you still remain stubborn in your ways and continue to live the way that you're living, guess what's going to happen in the future? Another locust is coming, but it's an army that's going to come, and they're going to imprison you, and they're going to kill you. You know, it's like a greater judgment is on the horizon. In the verse, we don't see it in English, but Joel actually uses 4 different Hebrew words for locusts here. Gazam, Arba, Yelek, and Hasil. I'm saying those exactly as they were meant to be pronounced, so just kidding. It's hard to understand why Joel decides to do this, but there's 2 hypotheses that seem to make sense to me, and they revolve around the idea of totality and eschatology. So regarding totality, it's a way for Joel to rhetorically describe just how completely and utter devastating this plague is because every type of locust has arrived. In terms of eschatology, which is a term for future events or end times events, the naming of 4 types of locusts could be in connection with what Ezekiel refers to as 4 deadly acts of judgment in Ezekiel 14, or what Jeremiah refers to as 4 kinds of destroyers in Jeremiah 15, a foreshadowing of eschatological judgment which would happen in the real far end times, like Revelation type stuff. Ultimately, as you're beginning to see, there's not a lot that we can go on here in the book of Joel, so we're not really concretely sure of a lot of things, but I'll tell you the one thing that we are fully sure of is that Judah was in the midst of crisis. I mean, the type of crisis that their lives were on the lines. And the vagueness here of not knowing a lot of things about this book can help us because without us knowing all the specifics, we're going to approach the contents of this book more as a general help and a general guide to any or all crises that we face. I think that's the intent of the book. The book is there to be an instruction manual and a guide. Because it's so vague in so many ways, we're basically looking at the book saying, how can you teach me to walk through and navigate all these challenging circumstances that I face? Whether it's a actual plague of locusts, whether it's an invading army, whether it's a direct act of God, or maybe it's just the happenstance of a fallen, broken world that we live in. As I said earlier, crisis and catastrophe do not seem to be in short supply these days, does it? We seem to be going from one to the next, or we're experiencing multiple ones at the same time. And on top of that, we are aware of every ongoing catastrophe and crisis that's going on in the world today. And we are just being drained mentally, emotionally, and physically. And the question is, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to live? Because I'm pretty sure there's something that's resonating in all of us that says, I don't think I'm really living the fullness of life that I'm supposed to be living right now. Is it possible to not just survive from day to day, but to experience elements of thriving in the midst of it all? Is it really possible for me to experience a taste of heaven in the midst of what feels like a living hell? Is it really possible for me to be part of a church that exists as a colony of heaven in a country of death? Is it really possible to have joy, contentment, and fulfillment, and energy, and all the things that I know that I need to have in this world that seems so chaotic, in a place where our lives just are not in the place we want them to be? Are we really able to be more focused on God and centered in Christ than focused on ourselves, our own predicament, and our own pain? The answer is yes, and Joel is going to help us. I know this was orchestrated by God this week because on Friday, as I was finishing up my sermon prep, I was invited to a lunch with our missionary that we supported in Turkey, and their family just recently got kicked out of the country, if you didn't hear about this, after serving 10 years in Turkey. But the church that they were a part of in Turkey, in Izmir, where they were living, his pastor flew to the U.S. this week and was here for about 10 days. So our missionary friend organized a lunch for me to sit down with him and meet his pastor from Turkey, a Turkish national who had flown here to the U.S. And it was just jaw-dropping, life-changing for me as I sat there and listened. I knew that the stories that he was telling me were just in preparation for what God is going to be leading our church through here as we go through the book of Joel. And out of all the stories that he told me, I'm going to just give you a quick sense of like what he was telling me. I was like, this man in this church has figured out the secret that Joel is trying to lead us into, which is how to live in a colony of heaven in the midst of a culture of death or a country of death. In Turkey, it's a Muslim country, so you are persecuted if you are a Christian, if you become a Christian, and the church there is a persecuted church. And this pastor gave his life to the Lord when he was about 17 or 18 years old. He became a Christian, and when he told his family, the family formed an intervention by inviting the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, everyone in the family came to the house, and they basically intervened and said, you are going to renounce your faith, and you are going to go to the mosque right now, and we are going to rededicate your life to Allah. And he refused to do that. And as a consequence, his family disowned him, and he completely was kicked out of his family. Over the years, he continued to serve the Lord, attend church, and he ends up becoming the pastor of this church. And it's an amazing mission and vision that they have. But in Turkey, modern-day Turkey is where the 7 cities where the letters in Revelation were written to. Like if you go in the first couple of chapters of Revelation, there's 7 letters written to 7 cities. They're all located in Turkey. Their church has a vision of planting churches in all 7 of these cities. There's only one of these 7 cities currently that actually has a Christian church in it right now. So he's telling me the story of how, as the pastor of this church, he's a younger pastor, so he's newer to this whole thing. He's telling me of what happened when the earthquake hit Turkey, Syria a few years back. That was a devastating earthquake that killed over 50,000 people. It was just this horrific event. I don't know if you remember this or not, but it was just all over the news. Well, his city where he lives is 15 hours away from where the earthquake hit. But when the earthquake hit, right when it hit, him and his church were like, we need to do something. So many of them got into vehicles and drove for 15 hours to get to where the devastation had happened. Ruins everywhere. They said that they could hear cries coming from the rubble as people were wanting to be rescued and saved. The Turkish response hadn't even hit the ground yet when they were already there, and they just didn't know what to do or how they could be of service or how they could help. But what they ended up doing, the first thing that they did was, and he has a video on his phone that he showed me, was they just pulled off to the side of the road on a corner, and right there on the road, they built a fire, a campfire, and they started to cook a big pot of soup. And he said that nobody was really coming to eat the soup because everybody was so traumatized from the event. People had lost lives. Like, there just wasn't an appetite, that people had. But this is what they felt like we're going to do. And they knew that people needed to eat, right? Like, if they were going to survive. So they're cooking soup, and they start serving one meal a day. But in order to even get fresh supplies to cook, they had to drive 5 to 6 hours a day to just get food to bring back to cook. Can you imagine the sacrifice and the strain of what that was, the toll that was taking? And they're cooking over an open fire on the side of the road. What started out as a couple of days turned into weeks, turned into months, and they ultimately stayed there for 8 months, serving the victims of this catastrophic earthquake. And what they did, which started with an open fire and a pot of soup, turned into a large kitchen operation with tents and canopies where they were at the height serving 8,000 meals 3 times a day, because the mayor of the town heard about what they were doing, came over there and said, "What are you doing?" And they were nervous because, again, they're a Christian church in a Muslim country. They thought they were going to get shut down. But they were honest and open and said, "Hey, we're a church. We're from Izmir." And the mayor said, "Thank you so much for being here." And the mayor just went out and got them as many supplies as he could, which is what furnished them into this huge kitchen operation, which allowed them to serve so many people over the course of those 8 months. In month 7 of them serving, he gets a call from his dad who had banished him from the family, and said, "I saw you on the news and what you're doing down there. I want to come help." And his son's like, "Well, you know that I'm a pastor and this is a Christian, and you don't want, so you understand what you're getting yourself into here." And his dad said, "I don't care. I want to come help." His dad came and served and cooked for the last month of them being set up in the region. After a few months of coming back, his dad gives his heart to the Lord, and his son was able to baptize his own father. The mayor of the town was able to talk to the mayor of one of the towns that they're wanting to plant a church in, and that mayor helped them secure a building for their next church plant that they're doing. And all of this came about because a group of people drove 15 hours, set up for 8 months, and said, "Let's start cooking some soup." And that picture, as I was hearing him tell me that story, and I already had the quote from Eugene Peterson rolling around in my mind, a colony of heaven in a country of death. That is what God is looking for us as a people to be, for Him and His presence to be so fully in us and with us that we help this world that is full of evil and death experience the goodness, the peace, the grace, and the generosity of the Lord. Here, our Turkish brothers and sisters understand something that you and I don't quite fully understand because we haven't yet counted the cost of what it means to truly follow Jesus. We're not enduring the pain and the suffering that they are. We don't have the mindset that they have, but you know what? They've tapped into a secret that we don't have in the midst of our luxury, our comfort, and our convenience here in the U.S. My friends, the kingdom of God is here. It has already broken in. Jesus has come and ushered in this kingdom, which means you and I have the privilege of living in the blessing of the presence of God while we are living right now on this earth. We have the ability to live and exist as a community together in a taste of heaven as God's presence dwells richly in us and among us. And we get to be an example for the world to see, for people to experience peace instead of pain, for people to experience help and love instead of hate and discard. Joel is going to provide help and hope for you and I if we are willing to listen to him, if we are willing to take his words to heart. He will teach us, he will guide us, he will instruct us, and he will direct us towards the kind of living that we can experience on this earth here and now, and get out of the exhaustion, get out of the paralyzation, get out of the just survival mode that we're in, so that we become residents of heaven here on earth.